Hi, Steve.
Hi, Jim.
A long time ago, when we did the audio only podcasts, we talked about some punk records. And I think I opened that particular episode up with a quote, a lyric quote from the Tubes that said, I was a punk before you were a punk. Upon further review of prepping for this week's episode, I would like to officially retract that statement because I don't think I was punk before looking at my collection.
Well, I'm definitely punk. And hello and welcome to Two Guys Talking About Records, that international podcast where there is just two guys sitting around talking about records.
Woo,
That's
we
what we
got
do, man.
records.
We got records. We got records, and more records. And I am Steve. I am an official record collector. I do have a card saying that.
Your business card says that. Cool.
Yeah.
My name's Jim, and I own a record store, and I've got a business card that says that, I suppose, too. But I've
Okay.
been known to dabble in collecting from time to time. So it's going to be a fun one today, Steve. I'd be driving around town, and you go around behind a store, and you pull into an alley, and there's Steve with a bunch of punk records. I said, man, this is up his alley.
That's right. Hidden punk. Because people look at me and go, God, that guy is a punker. You can
Yeah. Oh,
tell
yeah.
that for
You know what?
sure.
The retired pool cleaner wearing a Cornhusker
Oh,
shirt, playing with his
yeah.
grandkids. You are definitely punk.
Yeah. I guess I should have worn my Sex Pistols shirt. Dang, I didn't think about that. But Nebraska won, so I had to just celebrate.
There you go. And I could have and should have worn a Dead Milkman shirt, but that is a little after what we're talking about today. We're going to delve into the birth of punk. And as I mentioned in the intro, looking at my collection, you know what? I am pretty much limited to just a few things from that sweet spot of the punk rock era. I guess I would consider it a lot of my stuff is going to be post punk and then it drifts into some subgenres. And then I've got a few of the, what's being called proto-punk or pre-punk albums. So I
Yeah.
don't have that sweet spot. And I don't know why, other than maybe it's just never really appealed to me that much beyond the biggies that we'll talk about.
And I came into kind of late, only till about 82 when I really learned about punk. And then I just dove in. I mean, I just dove in and I wanted to get the early stuff. And I still look for it, especially the originals. And they're harder and harder to find, more expensive to find. And luckily, there are reissues on some of this. But I keep looking. If I can find an original, I'll grab it.
And from a collecting standpoint, that is one of the biggest things is finding that OG of a true early punk record or the mid 70s punk is a good find. And we've talked a lot before about that punk collection we brought in now several years ago and just how important that was for your collection, I guess, but also for the store here too. We did move a lot of that, and it wasn't a large collection by some standards of collections that I've brought in here before, but 300-400 OG punk albums is a big deal.
Yeah, it is. And obviously, I haven't ever seen anything like that again. And it really did help. But yeah, in the 80s, when I really got into punk, you could find it fairly inexpensive out there. It wasn't too bad, but times have changed.
They do, and that has to do with the changing the mindset of the collectors and what,
Hmm.
as a lot of us get older, what we begin looking for, things that we may have passed up in our youth. I'm finding a few things here from those years, whether it be punk or other genres, that I think I'm starting to get into now. But we all grow and change, and you've embraced the punk of the '70s a lot further than I have. So I think we're gonna just
Yeah.
pass on to you today, Steve.
Yeah, the 70s is my sweet spot.
There
You're
we go.
kind of going into the 80s
Yep.
is your thing, but that's how, my age at that time, your age at
Yep.
that time, it makes sense.
So we will dive into the birth of punk rock very shortly here on today's episode. But before that, as we do each and every week, we like to start off with our most recent pickups and additions to the collections which are ever growing and never purging, it seems like, unfortunately. I'm running out of space in my tote, and I'm going to need another tote to handle the overflow of my shelves. But how did you do this week?
Not too bad. I have some. I have one of those. Well, crap, that was stupid albums, but you know, they seem to happen more often. The older you get, the more it happens. You go, oh, what the heck? But we will begin with. They will get an original of the Beavis Frond, and this is Beavis Through the Looking Glass. Again, one I used to have way back when. Beavis Frond, psychedelia from the 80s, 90s. I mean, he's still putting it out. This one came out in 1988, just in beautiful condition. Had it from a guy right here in Colorado Springs on Discogs. In fact, he VCLT'd me this, so
Oh, cool.
I couldn't be more happy. Yeah, this is a huge album for me for the Beavis Frond collection. A lot of it's instrumental on here where he's just doing a lot of noodling and that, but it's trippy as all get out. So great stuff, the Beavis Frond. Then we have I bought this from a VC member, Dom, Seeking a Thread. He was selling off some of his collection. He does this periodically, and he'll put it out there. And it's the Delinquents, which kind of looks like it would be a punk band. There's the back of it. And this is an original from 1981. It's more new wave. In fact, it's like the B-52s.
Okay.
They definitely listen to the B-52s. You have that feel on here. I've known the Delinquents. They don't have like a ton of albums, but I've just never had anything. When I saw that was on his list, there's 3 albums I wanted. 2 had already sold, but he still had this one. I grabbed it. Wasn't it's a fairly inexpensive album. Did I really need it? Well, let's just go back to that. Probably not, but I got it.
So hold on here. You said that this was a VC member who was selling off portions of his collection. Are we really allowed to do that?
Yeah. Well, he sells it off to get money to buy better stuff.
There we go. And that was an odd thing for a record store owner to say. So please, we'll wipe that from the record, please. Make a motion.
Then I brought in this one. This is a reissue, The Counts. And this is not the doo-wop group, The Counts. This is the funk group, The Counts. And I believe this album came out in 72 originally. This group only did 3 albums. Really funky. They're on the Wasteland label. They never made it big because there was 2 other groups that came out at the same time with their albums. One was Funkadelic, and one was the Ohio Players. Wasteland really put their money into those 2 groups. And these guys were kind of, you guys are okay. Here's some smaller venues you can go play or something. So they never got a lot of love from them, but it's pretty good, funky stuff going on here. They even have a little steel drum action happening, congas, stuff like that. So, just a neat little early funk band. And then from that same, because they were doing these reissues from Westbound Records, picked up this Funkadelic. And again, important Funkadelic album, really, got them going and started. And so, I had this, and as I entered it in, I said, oh, well, I had the 50th anniversary Orange Vinyl edition already. Gosh, that's really cool. Now I have this other one. And then I looked, and, well, I have an OG of it. So...
Steve, do we need to have the talk about checking your Discogs first?
Oh, God, no. I can't. I was like, oh, my God. I did not check it. I got excited in the heat of the moment.
And that new one's on purple vinyl, if I recall, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I haven't even bothered to open it. I guess it goes on sale. I guess it's part of the purge or send it out or something. But, I did buy this from you, Jim.
The
It's
OG
from
one?
yeah, yep. See, you got
Yep.
my
Oh,
Radio Wasteland
there we
sticker
go.
right there. So yeah, I'm sure generally these were played a lot.
Yep.
So the orange probably sounds really good. Like purple, orange, ridge black. Oh Lord, yeah, yeah. There's something about messing up once, but when you do it twice, you have to really start to wonder.
You have to start going back. You should carry Discogs on your phone. Put that app on there so you can call it up in that moment of weakness.
I do. Does it really matter? No, it doesn't.
Oh,
But of the phone, it doesn't always show everything. Because I bought
I
an
know.
album and I'm looking, and it's not showing. So I buy it, get home, I got that already. Well, why didn't it show up? I don't
I
know.
rarely use the mobile app for Discogs. I'm here in the store all the time anyway on my
Yeah,
laptop. So I've got the browser version, which I feel is far superior. That's a discussion for another time,
yeah.
another episode.
I I use it on my iPad, which
Yep.
is really good. But yeah, in a store, I do often jump onto disc. I have such a big collection. It takes a long time to load. It's like, oh,
Yes.
yeah. But that's what I
That's
got
it.
this
Okay,
week, Jim.
cool. I had kind of a slower week as well. Nothing huge. Well, after that big Sabbath box set last week, I got to cool it just a little bit. But I did
Yeah,
find one. Steve Miller Band and Book of Dreams. I've
yeah.
got a couple of other Steve Miller fans, and I got to admit, I am not the biggest Steve Miller fan there is
Same here.
out there. The thing is the music is catchy. It's got hooks. It's cool to sing along with and bop your head to. But if you dive into it too far and you start thinking about Steve Miller's lyrics, that's when it starts to drive you a little nuts. When you when a songwriter thinks that he can go ahead and rhyme Texas and facts is that's you start but it's still fun music, so I'm not going to knock it too much. And this is a nice copy of Book of Dreams, and it has where did it go here? It has the merch order form on the inside still,
That's neat.
which is always fun when you can get an album that has the original stuff. So I could order a Joker T-shirt. Let's see, how much are those? The T-shirts are $5.
Yeah. Wow.
So
I
there
used to
is,
have 45s of a number of them. I remember I was in Chicago. We were kids and we're in the mall and we're walking by like a music lane. And I hear this music coming out. This is this spacey stuff.
oh
It
yeah,
was Steve Miller Band from that album. And I just thought, that's the most coolest sounding thing in the whole wide world. Of course, the rest of the family is not whatsoever getting it. What are you excited about? I go, listen to that. And yeah, I love that album.
it is a good one. There's another one we'd put out here in the store too. It's his Abracadabra album from the '80s. Same
Yeah.
thing. It's got catchy music until you start listening to the lyrics. And what's that one? Abracadabra. I want to reach out and grab you.
Yeah. I just could never buy that one. It's like abracadabra. I want to reach out and grab.
I don't want
Uh,
to knock all the Steve Miller fans or Steve Miller himself if he runs across this, but it's great music just as long as you don't think too hard about it.
yeah.
Okay, also a nice pickup, Toto and their fourth album. This is one of the ones that I think was a little overkill for me in the '80s. My roommate
hmm
at one time had this, and it was a constant on there. So I was like, oh, it's okay. But got myself a nice half-speed mastered version of this. And so when you can pick up these audiophile-esque type of releases, especially from the '80s, they do sound great. And this one is in just fantastic shape. So it also has the half-speed mastering. Oh, it's got the original stuff on there too. So the half-speed master info sheet that came with it, the other insert and the inner sleeve that came, but as well as the outer plastic with the hype sticker. So this was kind of a cool get. And they had this half-speed mastering sealed, which is
Yeah.
now no longer. These things, when you find them, the half-speed mastered versions, they're not. I mean, of an album that's usually $7 to $10. It's a good find, but then they add a lot more, obviously, because of the limited numbers of the half-speed master, a little bit
Sure.
more on the cost on those. So It's a cool one, and I'm giving that album another chance.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about punk, and you're showing Steve Miller Band and Toto.
And Toto,
Wow.
I know I'm going the wrong direction today. Final one, and this is a show this week, and we'll show off this week, and then we're going to dive into it. I think we can make an argument that these guys are kind of pre-punk, proto-punk, but
Yeah.
the Kinks, and you really got me. And this is a sealed copy of the Kinks, and let me call this up here really quickly on my Discogs page. Originally 1964, that shows the UK cover. So that I think is a little bit misleading for what I've got. But if you scroll down, you see that the original 64 cover for the US matches that. So here's the deal, Steve. I've been sitting on this for a little bit and trying to figure out what I want to do, because I like the Kinks. You know, we've talked about that before. I enjoy the Kinks, and I don't have this album. On one hand, it's sealed, and I need to know what it is. If it's that 1964, if this thing is really, truly 61 years old now, that would be a fine and a half if I open this up and it's got the Steamboat, the tricolor Reprise logo Steamboat, then this is that early one. I'll match the runouts. So I can't tell from the cover. It could be that, or it could be a later 60s or early 70s reissue. So what we're going to do is, this is called a tease, folks. Next week on the show here, we'll open this up and see what it is together, and I will catalog this in Discogs, and we'll find out together.
Yeah. Couldn't you like bring it to the hospital and put it on an X-ray machine or something and kind of look in there?
Can I get an
There it is.
MRI on this plan? Sure, it's only going to be, your insurance will cover 2% of it.
My wife was having a baby. It wound up being a record. Oh, I didn't know.
It's a tricolor Reprise from 1964. Congratulations. Have a cigar.
Yep.
So as we do each and every week, by the way, we'll put together a Spotify playlist of not only our pickups, but the punk stuff we're going to talk about here in a couple of moments. You can find that link to that playlist in the description of each of the versions of this episode. It is in the Spotify as well as the YouTube description. All you got to do is scroll down, click on that, and you can listen in on these. We still have to have that copyright police discussion, because I've been watching Rick Beato's page, and he's got or his channel, and he's got some stuff going on with that. But before we get to the punk stuff, Steve, I've got one other quick thing I want to show off, and I mentioned this on our channel's live update yesterday. Found in a record album that I brought in with a collection is a Pine Knob magazine from 1979. Pine Knob Music Theater, by the way, folks, if you are unfamiliar, is a historic music venue. I say historic, going back into the 70s. Here in Michigan. It's kind of a little bit north of Detroit, so a little ways from my mid-Michigan stop right here. But I grew up not too far from this, and I think my first Pine Knob concert was probably in 82, 81, 82, somewhere around in there. And I think it was REO Speedwagon. But I've gone to Pine Knob many times in my life. Most recently was to see Billy Strings last year. So to find this, somebody threw a program in with an album. It was a Foreigner album, but this is the Pine Knob magazine from 1969. Great condition. It's got a little article about Johnny Carson in there and Foreigner. They were both set to appear. It's got the schedule from late August and September of 1969, and I can show that off here. Very
Probably
cool.
1979.
79. I'm sorry, 1979. I did misspeak on that. 1979. And some of the acts on this that had appeared throughout August and into September include the Marshall Tucker Band, the Allman Brothers, Engelbert Humperdinck, Teddy Pendergrass, Sammy Davis Jr., Harry Chapin, the Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra, James Taylor, Sean Cassidy's on here, Donna Summer, Paul Anka, Chuck Mangione, Harry Belafonte, Gordon Lightfoot. Rush is on here also, too, for one night only, and through there for $10.50. The Tubes, the Rockets, Bobby Vinton, Johnny Carson, Foreigner, Chicago, Beatlemania. So it's a cool find. I love picking up stuff like this from the historical nature. I don't know what I'm going to do with this booklet yet. I'm going to probably try to put some scans of this online so folks can enjoy this as well. But there is one other thing I wanted to mention, because this is absolutely hysterical. One of the articles in here, it's called Knob Notes. Okay, so it's notes from Pine Knob, and I need to read this right here. It's about the nursing staff at Pine Knob in 1979. and it says Peace and Quiet and Perry Como. An unusually nice night for the Pine Knob nurses. It was Perry Como night at Pine Knob, and Marilyn Pike sat in the theater's command post, listening to the echo of the crooner's soft voice as it wafted over the hill to the unusual calm of the first aid station. It's nights like that Marilyn enjoys most as one of Pine Knob's 7 nurses. Aside from the request for the use of a wheelchair to help with an elderly Como fan to her seat, or a plea for aspirin from another woman, there was little for Marilyn to tend to other than to chat with the secretaries. Many nights in the summer, she and her fellow nurses have had their hands full. As of mid-August, over 150 concert goers had passed through the first aid room. Goes on to say the worst nights as far as the nurses are concerned are when the hard rock bands like Jay Giles and REO play at the theater. Unlike the more older, subdued Perry Como fans, rock and roll crowds tend to get a little rowdy. Some have been known to throw things like firecrackers or beer cans. Others are prone to step on sharp objects barefoot. And more than a few kids have swallowed more alcohol and drugs than they can handle, which, when combined with tubs of popcorn and hot dogs packed on top of it, result in some rather unpleasant stomach eruptions. So, Pine Knob in 1979, nice place to go as long as you're listening to Perry Como, but stay away from those hard rockers like Jay Giles
Yeah.
and REO Speedwagon.
I figured they would have had a couple heart attacks or something during Perry Como, you know. Just, wow.
Wheeling him to the chairs. Unlike, I mean, that was 79. Unlike last year when we went to Billy Strings, now that certain things are recreationally legal here in Michigan, I tell you what, that was just, you walk out of there going, hey.
Yeah, in Denver, it was inside and no smoking. Oh yeah, right.
Well,
that wasn't happening.
Steve, you know what? Those that break those rules, though, they're really punk rock, aren't they? They are
That's
the
right,
type that
they
would
are.
rebel against authority and say, screw the man. We're punk rockers. Although
That's
Perry
right.
Como and Billy Strings are not.
We're going to reject that idealism.
There you go. So this week on Two Guys, Steve and I are going to delve a little bit more into the birth of punk rock. And this is it's an interesting subject because most rock and roll music, most music is going to come from other influences. And you could trace things back as far as you wanted to for influences to classical music, to the great composers, all the way through some of the big band era, the crooners or the early blues artists are all going to have some sort of influence on the genres that come behind them. So in that scheme of things, punk rock did not just appear. It was not created in a vacuum. It had to come from somewhere, and it had to birth itself in that early to mid 70s and then go on to influence the stuff that I'm a little bit more familiar with in the post-punk era in the 80s and the alternative music. So in researching on this episode, Steve, I came up with a few things that I thought were very interesting. And I've heard it referred to as proto-punk or pre-punk or something like that. And I don't know as if you could really call it that or even punk rock. But one of the earliest examples of, I think, somebody rebelling against that authority, as we talked about, and is not a punk rocker by any means whatsoever, is Elvis Presley. He broke that mold away from the very easygoing, laid back, the Perry Comos, if you will, of the era in the 50s. And even though his music is most decidedly rock and roll and started in the rockabilly side of things, there's a few songs from Elvis that I really do consider to be the precursor to punk rock. Most notably something like there's a 1958 song called Trouble, which has got a very brass influence. But if you're looking for trouble, it's a blues-based song, but he's almost growling through it, which gives you that attitude. Another one that's actually, I've got it on I say iPod still, but it's my phone now, is My Baby Left Me, which is just a real percussive driven song that's got notes of early punk rock in there. So is it legal for me to start this discussion on the pre-punk era with Elvis?
I'll let you. Yeah. Okay.
You'll allow it.
Yeah.
Before we get to the true the pre-punk stuff, the only other one I want to mention, and this is the Beatles' White Album. And so was this 68, I believe, if I recall correctly on there. And no, I made a note on that just so I wouldn't get it wrong. But Anyway, the song Helter Skelter, specifically, if you think about that song, I think that's a punk rock song, straight up. And it's the Beatles amongst a lot of other cool experimental stuff on here, but that's going to be my argument. I'm saying that could have been a great stepping point for punk rock.
I think Charlie Manson thought it was a punk rock song.
That's true. All right. Okay. Maybe I'll withdraw the punk rock from the Beatles at that point. It influenced a few other things, didn't it?
Yeah. It really got things going, man. But it kind of destroyed the whole hippie era.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Agreed. So whether or not those influenced punk, I guess it's debatable. It could be up to you, but it had to come from somewhere. But a lot of the proto-punk bands that you think of are ones I think that we share a few different ones leading up to that golden age of punk in the mid '70s. And can I kick it off here? The Stooges.
Yeah,
Are you gonna?
You bet.
This is
Yep.
most definitely. I think this is one of the ones that you could say, and we each have a good OG copy there. Could you?
I do.
Really say that this is the birth of punk rock?
It is right there with it. Yeah, I think this. A lot of people say Velvet Underground, which came out before the Stooges, was a big part of it, getting things going because anti-establishment, talking about things nobody else was talking about, and so they label them in there. But their music doesn't seem as punky, shall we say. These guys, yeah, they really came out and were hitting it hard. But y'all, the MC5.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yep. I think this came out before the Stooges, if I remember right.
Stooges were
can't
69,
remember.
and I'd have to look at the MC5. It was
69 on this one also. I just know they are both in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You know.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We've
Detroit.
We've talked a lot before about Michigan's influence in a lot of genres. You've got the birth of Motown through there. You've got some early punk coming through there. A lot of acid rock as well.
Yeah, and both have attitude.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. Shorter songs, just this attitude, and kind of, hey, we don't like, we're changing up how music is.
Yep. So the Stooges and MC5 69. And then one more I want to bring up, or you still have some from the 60s, because I have to get into 1970s with my next one.
No, I actually I don't. So pop her in.
My next one is a bit of an oddity because technically speaking, it's 1971 and it's also Michigan. It is the band Death. You've got that too. The Hackney Brothers. But this album wasn't released until 2009, I believe, 2009, 2011. Music came out. There was a documentary called A Band Called Death. The album pressing is from 2008, I'm sorry. So, but yeah, the documentary chronicles the growth of this band. It was three African-American brothers from Detroit who wanted to play punk rock. And that's still in that same vein of the Stooges. I mean, very, very Stooge-like, that Michigan acid sound that we've talked about a lot before. But they couldn't get a recording contract because everybody said, you guys should be playing soul or Motown or funk or something along those lines. And they held true to this, and they wanted to play punk rock. So For the Whole World to See was kind of a posthumous release of the band, even though one of the brothers died, I think, in 2000. It's not too long ago, but these guys have kind of held true to being early proto-punk or pre-punk rockers with that Michigan sound, a la the Stooges and a la MC5, all from Detroit. For me, this is good early punk too. I love it.
It is.
Which is bizarre because after the one brother died, I think it was, which one of the brothers died, but Bobby and Dennis Hackney continued. They actually did some gospel music, and I'd found this one. Into the 80s, they did a reggae album, which is actually a little valuable in and of itself too. But this band called Death, which was punk in the early 70s, moved itself into Ragaman in the 1980s.
Yeah, it was exciting what was happening out of Detroit. Things, but they had was it the riots then, or was the riots
Yep.
later?
No, no, it was right
Uh,
around that same time period.
yeah, so just a lot of turmoil was happening, and that turmoil shows within the
Yep.
music.
It does. Yeah, the riots would have been 68, I think, I believe.
Okay.
68. Yeah, I'd have to go back and remember. I was actually still living as an infant in Detroit at that time. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
yeah, that's pretty.
aside of Detroit and its own Michigan roots in the proto-punk or pre-punk era, it really did not kick off until. And if you want to have a race on this, you want to say New York, London, London, New York. But I think New York takes the edge for the true
It does.
birthplace of punk rock,
It does.
with a club in particular that led to much of this coming out.
Yeah. But, well, in leading up to that club, you had the New York Dolls
Yep.
would be one. Now, kind of glam, but what really kind of sets these folks apart is Malcolm McLaren came down to manage them and tried to put his special touch on things. Adam dress up with knots with swastikas and red leather, but he began to see things happening in New York that, especially, he met Richard Hell. And Richard
Yep.
Hell was the guy that was doing, putting safety pins on his clothes and stuff like that. And McLaren sees this and goes back to England and starts the shop Sex. I mean, he had a clothing shop with or Vivian Westwood did, and gets with her and says, let's try this, and was very anti-fashion. But the New York Dolls had kind of that punk feel, and again, glammy punk, but that was a big part of it. And another band, which was considered Suicide.
Yep.
They're their own genre, quite honestly. But it was such a change from what was happening. To the punkers, what really got a lot of punk music going is rock had become Billy Joel, Simon and Garfunkel, the Eagles, stuff like that, or just these long jams going on, and it was just kind of pissing them off. And that's where you go back to, you can say, to your Elvis roots or whatever. Rock and roll was, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which was like an epic song for the Ramones to go that long. But they were just, this is their way of being fed up with it. There was that, again, that projection of the political idealism that was going on, but also of the California flower power hippie movement.
Yes.
This is, we're done with that, man. We don't want. And now that's just in the U.S. When you look at, the UK, was totally different. It was very, very political, but the UK was in a terrible, recession, and unemployment was high. So
Yep.
two totally different worlds going at, but putting out the same kind of music. And it's just another group I wanted to talk about, it out of Cleveland, Rocket from the Tombs. And this was just an incredible kind of post or whatever pre-punk band. And on here from this group came the Dead Boys, because Rocket from the Tombs didn't last very long, but members from it made the Dead Boys, and other members made Pere Ubu. And both of these, especially Dead Boys, had big success in CBGBs. So, but Cleveland had a scene going on. I think there was another group called the Eels down there that was putting out some of this early punk type music. But Cleveland was not going through good times. Factories were shutting down and everything, and it was rife for that kind of music.
And that type of socioeconomic unrest, I think, both in London, in the UK, not so much New York, but in the Midwest, in that era in the 70s, things were hard, and that was really what kind of birthed this anti-establishment. Okay, we're not the Eagles, we're not
Yeah,
Simon and Garfunkel. We're done with folk music. Let's rip this mother up. And that, I think, what you
exactly.
mentioned, CBGBs in New York, that really represented the launch point for so many bands.
Yeah, and it's CBGBs and OMFUG is the official title. Country folk blue, country folk bluegrass and blues, and other music for uplifting gourmetizers or whatever. So, okay, there was kind of what should we call it, and we just keep going and going. Let's shorten that baby up.
But I mean, you think of some of the bands that started there, and you pick the Ramones first up, and uh, the New York Dolls, especially coming through there. But
Yeah,
it also in television. Yeah, I forgot my television album, bringing that one out. So
yeah,
that okay, it's all punk, but that also really kind of helped. And we don't. I don't want to get too far into the branching off of punk because we're still talking about the birth of punk. But then
hmm,
you look
yeah,
at something like Blondie or the Talking Heads or Devo or something like that that carries punk in a different
yeah.
direction in the 80s, but we're sticking in the 70s here. So,
Well, and in New York there was a theater called the Mercer that a lot of unsigned bands went to. Well, the Mercer fell down. I mean, it just literally fell down. And so now these people go, we got no place to go. So television sees this CBGBs and they go in there and they try and talk to the guy. And he had really no idea what this music was about or what they were doing, but they kind of begged, can we come in? Can we play? He goes, all right, Sunday night. I'll let you play Sunday night. So they began playing Sunday night, but they began bringing in their friends because not a lot was happening at CBGB's. And so more people began to come in and began to listen. And to your, and I mean, these guys, they started in 74. In April of 74 is when they started playing. By August of 74, this band, who had heard television and that, thought, hey, this is a place we could play because this was the one venue where you did not have to be signed to a contract to come and play. And there's two rules that Billy Crystal had, that Hilly Crystal had. One was you had to carry your own equipment, and the other one is you had to play almost all original songs,
yeah.
no covers. You could have a couple covers, just a couple, but otherwise. So they came in, the Ramones, with their, they would do a set in 10, 15 minutes and
20 songs.
do it. Yeah, 20 songs and blast through it. But also in August came in another group that originally was it Angels and Snakes? But Angels and Snakes got a new lead singer and became Blondie. And so Ramones and Blondie came in at the same time and started playing. And then it just began, exploding more because Patti Smith came in.
Yep.
And, she was, a poet. But, she was with Lenny Kaye and they began doing other things and they formed a band where she could put her poetry to music. And she became really big in CBGBs and got things excited. Well, McLaren had seen some of this again going on. So, he was kind of excited when he went back and said, here's something that, maybe I could take and we can make it excited. And at his shop at Six, he was actually managing a band called The Strand. And not much was happening with The Strand, and they needed a new lead singer. So they got a new lead singer and changed their name to the Sex Pistols.
Yep.
And yep, there. Look at that, pink and yellow.
Yep.
Yes.
This is the US version.
Yeah. And this really, really, I mean, in the UK was, I think their first concert like 40 people, but now, 10,000 say they were there. So, it's one of those things. I did want to bring it, television formed the Heartbreakers came out of New York Dolls, but also from television. Richard Hell joined the Heartbreakers, but then formed his own band, Richard Hell and the Voidoids, which a few of his songs, if you listen to concerts from early television, are Richard Hell songs. But because he wanted to be so different, because him and Tom Verlaine were great friends. They were roommates. They were big into books, and I think both maybe might have been majoring in English in college, possibly, but really good friends. But once they got the band going, Verlaine wanted to be the man. Richard Hell didn't want that. Richard Hell wanted to do his own thing, jump up and down and be wild and crazy. And Verlaine television wasn't about doing that. So Hell really was a big part of the punk movement, getting it going. And again, influencing Sex Pistols.
On the UK side, it really is the Sex Pistols. I've only got one other one other than the compilation, but the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, a documentary of sorts, really kind of about following them around and such.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the quintessential punk album that represents the birth of punk in Great Britain in the 70s at that point in time. And you can call up, okay, there's the Clash and who else would have come up through there in that era? The Damned.
The Damned.
I've got a Damned
Clash.
album here. Oh, I don't have my Damned album. I thought I did. I've got a compilation. Damn it. Did. There we go. So, and they all kind of come from that initial push from the Sex Pistols, mm-hmm. which had been brought over from the New York side of things, as you were saying.
Well, and then they, so Sire Records, signed the Ramones. And suddenly, Sire is a label trying to figure out what to do. It's a brand new label. And suddenly they're looking at this punk scene going, well, should we give this a try? So they signed that up. Ramones go over to the UK for a concert. Their opening band was Talking Heads. Now, in CBGB's, Ramones and Talking Heads, they were actually pretty good friends. I mean, they got along. They went to each other's sets. They all did that. When they went to Europe, the Ramones was the act. Talking Heads was, the other act. And the Ramones kind of got uppity on them. It wouldn't help them. Ramones had roadies. Talking Heads didn't. Those roadies wouldn't touch Talking Heads stuff. And there was some friction, but, they were touring together. But watching the Ramones was the guys from the Buzzcocks. Oh, and the Buzzcocks was the Ramones was a big influence on them. The Adverts, which this is one of my favorite songs, the Crossing the Red Sea with the Adverts, just great punk music on here. One Chord Wonder, Gary Glitter's Eyes. This is one I really wanted an original, something fierce. Never find it, but they were there to see the Ramones, and the Ramones got so many people along with the Sex Pistols doing this stuff. And what I really liked in the UK is the amount of females that got involved with punk music, more so than in the US. We did have them in the US, but you had the Rizzolos over there, X-Ray Specs. I mean, that's a classic. Again, female led, and then you had like the Slits, an all-female punk band. These are both early bands, and just this influence where anybody could do it. And that was the thing about punk. Punk really was anybody can do this. As someone said, just learn 3 chords and away you go. And it was. And so a lot of punk bands, these were people that were not musicians, were not trained in musicians. Here's some instruments, and just start learning it. Just start figuring out how to play. And they would. And it didn't matter. It was all about energy and excitement, which I think is why I like punk. Music is the albums are packed with energy. I mean, to listen to a Sex Pistol album and you just sit there calm. Man, that stuff that's exciting.
So the music is less technical, more driven, more gritty. The vocals not necessarily have to be any kind of virtuoso, or it could just be growled in some cases. You think about Patti Smith as well. The vocals are not classically trained in any way, shape, or form, but they worked well for that era and what the music was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much so. And it just began to spread. My Sunday show, I showed the thing from South Africa. Over in Australia in 76, it took off, and you had Radio Birdman and the Saints. And the Saints is just an incredible classic album of great punk music. And I'm Stranded, which was their big punk hit, which incredibly good song, but that is just an amazing debut album. The Radio Birdman, this is a nice compilation, but it has a wonderful song, Aloha Steve and Dano, which that song kills me. It's just so good. But the other countries were all catching up and going at this, again, it just took off. But the Ramones were touring Europe now. Talking Heads were over there. Everybody. The Sex Pistols wanted to, but no one would have them. But that was part of their mystique. That's what was selling. Is we're so bad, we're outlawed everywhere, and that's what McLaren wanted. He would just sit there. Bad news is great news.
Yep. Well, the Sex Pistols were kind of a short fuse and a short candlelight anyway in their existence.
There's no way it could last.
This existence, no.
Yeah, they were just too much. They could not make it.
The influence, though, you mentioned that the Ramones had on everybody leading outward from there, and their connection to the Talking Heads I find interesting because I've never really considered the Talking Heads to be a punk band, although their start in CBGB as well. They're more of that droning. They're kind of a mixture, if you want to say, from even the Velvet Underground with a little bit of that drone sound, but then they carry that punk into it to create something new and off to the side, which I'll still call alternative music.
Yeah, I think when you look at their early, like Psycho Killer, has a little bit more of that punk type attitude on their first album, but definitely a little more the new wave, that was coming out, and you could feel that it was not the Ramones or anything. Jerry Harrison came in, he had been with Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. And so when he joined the group, he kind of filled out that sound a little bit more and took him from that 3-piece, which had a little more edgy, into something a little more commercial.
I've always been fascinated by the terminology of the genres as they evolved. When you call that new wave, then that is technically going to be second wave punk. Blondie as well, new wave, Devo. And yes, to some extent, the Talking Heads in that second wave where they've taken the foundations that were created with those just very gritty 3-chord guitar, short 2-minute songs, and then begin to meld them into something a little more structured, which then you could make the argument is no longer punk rock at that point.
Right. And that was a good point. Devo was part of that very early CBGBs. The Cramps came in, and the Cramps definitely have a punk feel, but yet it's all different, when they get to the so-called psychobilly or more rockabilly, but that was an influence of punk.
And this one I'm going to count because it's 1979, so we're still in the 70s before we get to my sweet spot, which is the 80s punk. But you get the Dickies and the Incredible Shrinking Dickies, and this is kind of the evolution, if you will, of that grittier punk into a more comedic, which leads to the Dead Milkmen, and to some extent the Dead Kennedys on the West Coast, working from there. But I still count this. One of the other acts that I really, truly believe has its roots in punk of the 70s, but then turned into whatever. And I've got a bootleg album of The Police. This is called Vinyl Villains, which is actually very kind of a cool cover, even though it's just a Photoshop. Yeah. It's a bootleg, but it's a live concert from The Police, recorded in March of 1979 in Los Angeles. And even though they're doing Roxanne on this, I think they're premiering Roxanne on one of these in that era. This is a punk record, tried and true. And the energy that The Police put out in the late 70s was that of punk. But then again, they adapted and moved and melded into whatever The Police would become. I'd call them alternative before they became top 40 and before Sting became whatever Sting became.
Yeah, but in UK was changing because now punk had become commercial.
Yeah,
and the clothing was all commercial. The haircuts, commercial. The edge was gone because everyone accepted it as I am cool, I'm a punk. So in came the new romantics that we're going to dress up, wear suits and stuff. Totally anti-punk on what they're doing, but that's how music goes. It gets so accepted, and when everyone else jumps in, then it's time to come up with a new thing that this is my music. And I think that's, again, as the kids come up, you know what? My older brother listens to that crap. I I want something of my own. And so you see the genres jumping and jumping, and then they start repeating and repeating.
You want to catch that new wave, so to speak, and then ride that
Yes,
into the
that's
next
right.
into the next decade. But you've mentioned, Steve, though, that the '70s is really your sweet spot for punk. That is
Hmm.
where a lot of your favorites tend to meld from. Mine, again,
Yeah,
I mean, did a little bit of the age in there, but mine tend to be as you move into the '80s. The likes of the Dead Kennedys, and I've got a couple of Kennedys albums.
yeah.
But then
Hmm.
these meld into that West Coast side punk, the West Coast of the U.S. moving
Yep.
through. We mentioned before too the Minutemen and what they did. But this is again 1984, so we're moving
Hmm.
into the mid '80s and away from that birth as things begin to evolve and move across the U.S. in particular.
And US began going hardcore. And the
Yep,
hardcore punk
Black
took
Flag
off.
and yep,
Misfits, it just Agent Orange, which I do have a number of hardcore albums now I've bought as I've tried to expand over, but
yep.
my sweet spot is the 70s.
Oh, even things bands like Fear. I don't have my Fear albums here. I've got them
Mm,
at home, but that's that expansion too into I don't know, Fear, hardcore. You can count them along the lines of the Butthole Surfers and things of that nature too, where wherever punk took that direction, and even into more alternative sides like Husker Du. But again,
yeah,
I don't want to get too far in the '80s because I feel that could be another episode.
true, very, very true. But it is kind of, in the UK, you look at bands like Wire that had,
Yep,
the Pink
yep,
Flag was an early punk album, but how they've kept going, kept evolving. Killing Joke kept evolving,
yep.
which is fun to listen to and watch. It's just oftentimes we have that era of that band that this is what I like. Why'd you change it? Dang you, you know.
Well, and that goes through to any band that has a certain amount of longevity. I'll
Hmm.
mention Rush in that group, but in that thing like the Rolling Stones, we did an episode on the Rolling Stones and how when you're around for 50 plus years, your styles are gonna change with what's happening with the musical stylings as they become popular throughout.
Unless
You
you're
t-
ACDC
yeah, unless you're ACDC or the Ramones even too.
or the Ramones. Good point. Yeah.
They've held
Yep.
true to that. But then you look at somebody like Blondie or even U2 or the Police, as I've mentioned,
Yeah.
that start as one thing, but then they begin to, I don't want to say mature in some cases, but I can't think of a better term for that other than we're shifting our sensibilities into something that's a little bit different than what we started out
Mhm.
as.
Yep. U2 was a good mention because they started as a punk band.
Oh, yeah,
That's how
yep.
they wanted to become. Elvis Costello, talk about a guy that really changed. Suddenly, 20 years later, he's with Burt Bacharach.
Yes, I know.
I mean, there's a switch for you.
There's a huge one. And then I mean into
But
the '80s you start getting into the later MTV era where the appearance is going to be as important
mhm,
for a lot of these bands. Um, again, that's a whole other story as you want to talk about the influence that video and music video had
yeah,
on a lot of these. And yes, that there was music videos of sort being shot in the film as far back as the likes of the Beatles doing performances or some of the West Coast LA or the San Francisco hippie bands doing films. And you, again, don't discount what Woodstock and the live performance films could do as well. But the MTV era took this and put this in the faces and made it more of a product, I think, as you were saying.
yeah, very much. Yeah, commercialized it.
Do you see yourself sticking with just that sweet spot, or do you? I know you as a collector, you expand and you see a shiny thing and you move in that direction
Yeah,
from there too. But you still tend to gravitate toward a lot of these.
I do. And if I'm at shows, that's what I'm looking for. It's just certain ones. I have quite a few of the early punk albums that I really, really want, but there's some I'm still missing. I'm still, that I had, pre-flood, and so I'm looking for, some Johnny Thunders, that Adverts, an original, that original Buzzcocks. I have the represses. They're great sounding, so I don't need to spend the money, but it's just that excitement of having
That
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 first
first
original.
press. That brings
Yeah.
up a good point. Earlier, you mentioned too that at one point, and this is true for most vinyl, in that down period in the '90s, you could pick up vinyl for dirt cheap. All of these things should have been kept. I kept a lot of mine. I know you were holding on to yours as well, but
Yeah.
why is it now? Is it part of the resurgence? And again, I hate that term, but some of these punk albums, and we'll look at the Minutemen that came out of that punk collection we mentioned before too, triple digits all the way through. What is it that makes these so valuable? Is it just that there were so few of them put out, or now is there more demand combined with that?
I think a lot of it is demand, new collectors coming in, more money that, hey, well, I'm willing to buy this, just get some for investment purposes. I truly believe that. There are people that buy up for that. But people just, they want to go back and reach roots. Okay. So I like this band, but hey, they said that these were the bands that were influential, and so they look back and they want to do it. Nirvana, I always think of them, how they got so many bands that were unknown, but here's what influenced us, here's what we like, and people went nuts to find those albums. And I still think you have that. There's lots of documentaries out there, YouTube. You can find millions of punk ones, and people watch it and go, God, that is really, really neat. I got to go find those albums. And so the represses keep coming out on some of this too to help you out.
And I think that there are some labels. SST is a good example of a label that had been around for a long time and is now finding themselves, hey, we've got a lot of this stuff in our stable. Let's start reissuing this. And so you get reissues from the Descendants, and you get reissues from the Meatmen and things of that nature, that a lot of these 80s into 90s punk bands are really finding that wave of the resurgence. But again, that's not the 70s roots that we've been talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And they keep unearthing things, like Death. 2000, it was put out. I just bought, I can't think of the name of the group, but it was another African-American, early punk band that never became famous. Never had their album put out till to the aughts. And all of a sudden, it makes it out. God, I can't think of. I'll be showing it pretty soon.
Okay. And for those mentioning Death again, and for those that haven't seen it, I don't know if it's streaming, but I do strongly recommend seeking out the documentary, A Band Called Death, to see the story of these brothers and what they went through with their album. And if you ever find a Death 45 from 1971 or 72, those things are worth quadruple digits. They're in the thousands of dollars because there were so few of them produced. So, this is definitely an era that I need to expand myself a little bit further beyond the Sex Pistols and beyond just a couple of I do have a Ramones, but I've got a Ramones mania, so I've got their greatest hits. That covers it for me, but I can go looking through there. One more thing I needed to mention, Steve. We are now almost through this episode. Did we actually make it through an entire episode without mentioning Pink Floyd?
We sure did.
Okay, let me fix that. Here it is. Punk versions of Pink Floyd, and it's called Punk Floyd, a tribute to Pink Floyd. Okay, I took care of that.
I got almost a whole cube of Pink Floyd. I didn't know how much. I'm putting away stuff, which is something I hate to do. Put away my albums, and like, holy moly, one of the whole cube's almost all just Pink Floyd. How'd that one happen?
That's my story too. But you've got a copy of this, right? I really enjoy punk versions of Floyd. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought we'd get through the entire episode, but no, I had to stop and do that. I had to ruin it for everybody.
Oh, there we go.
We
needed punk versions. We needed punk versions of Rush to really complete it.
Ooh, okay. Oh, let me work on that one and see what happens.
Okay.
Right. Well, you folks have been watching and or listening to this latest episode of Two Guys Talking About Records. And once again, we'll put up the Spotify playlist link in the descriptions. And I hope I can find most of this stuff. Should be able to, because the punk is out there and it's not going away. It's matured a little bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. They're all gray hairs now.
Oh, geez, aren't we all? So, all right, sir. Well, it has been a pleasure talking to you as always. So until next time, my name is Jim, and I own a record store.
And I am Steve, a punky record collector.
Punky. There we go.
Yeah, punky.
Have a great week, Steve. Thanks.
You too. Bye, everyone.